So, welcome everyone to our Talking Lymph Live last one for 2025. We're really honoured today to have Mike with us. He's the editor of the journal Lymphology, and also he's heavily involved in the International Society of Lymphology. He's done countless conference presentations on lymphedema and lymphatic research. And I've invited him to join us this meeting because he has such a broad and vast understanding of lymphedema management.
I put together a couple slides, about 6 or 8, on whole different aspects of lymphedema and treatment and MLD, just to try to give a whole little mishmash, you know, and I thank Jan for organizing this. So to make the model in a rat, it's not as easy, which, you know, makes us think about humans. You know, some people get lymphedema and some people don't with the same operation. We still don't exactly know why. We put a little blue dye in the foot and it goes up the lymphatic vessels. And then here along the femoral vein, you can see the lymphatic vessels. And then we take those out and we take the node out, just like you would do with breast cancer. And then you have to make a little incision in the skin that goes all the way around the leg, and you make a little gap, and that interrupts the skin, the superficial lymphatics. So we interrupt both the deep and the superficial, and then we put a little irradiation on it, just like patients who get for breast cancer. And you get a swollen foot. This one is blue because we put the blue dye in, but you can see how the dorsum of the foot is swollen compared to the normal rat foot. 3 different approaches: a pneumatic compression. We used little neonatal blood pressure cuffs and used a pneumatic compression device. Bandaging, we used Coban for the rats because we needed something to stick a little bit, so you had to be more careful on the pressure. And you can see we have a little gauze underneath there, so we put an underlayer of bandaging, just like you guys would. And then we did MLD. Of course, you can't do concentric circles that easily. You have to do it with your finger. There's no scoop or pump. So a lot of it is with your hands and with your thumbs, but similar to what you did with humans. And we did a trial where we treated them for a week. Each day. So they were on the pump for 6 hours and bandaging for 6 hours, and then MLD for 20-30 minutes, and then we let them recover. But when we looked at them all together, there's 2 sets of bars for each one here. This is the daily change. So CDT, so we did massage and the bandage wrapping, just the bandage wrapping, the manual lymph drainage, and then just a compression pump. So each day, this was the reduction in the volume. We looked at it before and after the treatment. So pretty big reductions for CDT and bandaging, and also the compression pump, but really not so much daily reduction for MLD. And then the controls, of course, went down daily. And then at a week, that's the dark bars, we looked at the combined effect. So CDT, compression bandaging was actually a little bit higher, but not really significantly higher. Manual lymph drainage was about the same. So that really was fascinating to us, that despite lower daily reductions, we could get overall, at the end of a week, reductions in the limb. So we know that MLD is doing something. So then we went just a little bit further on the MLD, and we did 3 different types of MLD approach. A traditional approach where we stimulate the nodes in the neck, both the axilla, the groins. We also did the opposite leg and the swollen leg. So really a little bit more you do with a patient, but similar to what you would do with full MLD. And then we did MLD without the swollen limb, and then we did MLD only on the swollen limb. So now we're trying to look, is there a systemic effect? Is there something going on? Does doing the watershed work, is it important? And when we looked at them, again, not a huge number, about 10 in each group, the full MLD and all but the limb were almost exactly the same. And interesting enough, the limb by itself was lower. And then when we compared to the control, of course, the control went up. So that's why it looks like a negative, because this is a reduction value. So fascinating that if you did not touch the limb, but you did everything else, you prepared the body, you stimulated things in the body, you opened the nodes and the channels, you got similar reduction. So that's really fascinating for us to look at MLD. And then we're trying to work, some of my students are working in some projects in PT. So I put this slide in here. It's not lymphedema, but there is this thing from physical therapists or physiotherapists, you'd have them in Australia, that if you work one limb, say somebody had a severe knee injury and their leg needs to be rehabilitated. If you work on strengthening the normal leg, the diseased leg or the affected leg actually gains some on itself. So we know from these other aspects of medicine that working on one limb actually affects the other side of the body, the contralateral side. So just adding little bits of evidence to why we think MLD is important. And then in our treatment center, we had some patients who, Arizona is very hot, so this is where we did this work. They did not want compression bandaging. They were newer lymphedemas. They were 20% volume increase or less, so not really substantial lymphedemas. And we had a group, about 40 patients in each, that got CDT or just got MLD. And this was more like in the United States treatment, 2 weeks, 5 sessions a week, so 10 sessions. And when we looked at the volume difference at the end of 2 weeks, almost exactly the same, 80% for the MLD and 72% for the CDT or CPT, we called it that time. So virtually the same by statistics. So we know MLD works. So then a slide or two to get you thinking. This paper just came out at the end of last year. A Chinese group, they put sensors on people's hands and they had them do MLD for multiple treatments. And you can see here from stage 1 all the way up to stage 3. And they looked at the pressures that therapists were doing. They used a lot of patients, 42 patients and 14 therapists. So it wasn't just one. This is a really nicely done study. And what they found is the pressure is from 17 to about 34. And that depends on what part of the arm the massage was put on and what stage the lymphedema was at. Because you guys all know if you have something fibrotic, you're maybe push a little more pressure on that than if you have something very soft. So makes very good sense. I like this one because it puts some standardization to MLD and some idea of what types of pressure we're going to do. And then here's another paper, the references there, that just came out in 2025. There's no way any of you would probably ever look at this paper because it doesn't talk about lymphedema as much. But what they were doing is they were looking at patients with lupus and they had photosensitivity, so the ultraviolet radiation would come in. And this paper had something fascinating, which I haven't seen in many. They have a graphical abstract compared with the written abstract. So the graphical abstract shows that UV hits the skin with people with lupus, you get some inflammation, and in general, it worked through the lymphatic system, and when it had poor flow, you get more responses from our immune system, our T and our B. But when they used mice that had better lymphatic flow, or they did MLD, and MLD on the mice or the patients, they got better flow that activated some pathways, and that stopped. That's what these little lines with the cross means. It stopped both those reactions. So here we have evidence of MLD doing something in the skin to patients with lupus. My last slide, there's 2 papers, and you can find them both here. Are one of our good friends, Linda Kohler. She's a PhD physiotherapist in Minnesota, and a newer person to our field, Dave Dulestein, and he's actually in Arizona. They wrote these articles, which I really like. Don't throw manual lymph drainage out with the volume. Just like we have sayings here, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And looking at it, I like how they say MLD does not reduce volume is a moot point, because it was never implicated to do that from the beginning. Although, our work with the rat shows that you can reduce volume with MLD, and in patients with newer, softer lymphedema, you can do it too. But they talk about how it increases the lymphangiomatoticity, venous return, autonomic nervous system, similar to what we talked about with the PT rehabilitation of limbs that were affected, working on one side, working the other, impacting the other. So I think that really all fits together nicely. And then they talked about the efficacy of manual lymph drainage. There are papers out there, and there are people out there that discuss how important MLD is. And there's also people out there that to talk about how non-important MLD is. And we're struggling with this. And I'm not comfortable with that. I know Jan isn't comfortable with it, but we like to put this out there, and I'd be very interested to hear some of your points or some of your questions.
One of the things that motivated me to ask Mike to join our, give us the presentation that he has today, because anecdotally, there's a trend that seems to be coming through in social media and amongst therapists to stop redirecting the lymph, so to only use the ipsilateral side, if you like, in breast cancer. And that's, to me, also is a bit of a worrying trend. I don't know how much you're seeing that in the States yet, but we're certainly seeing it here in Australia. And that was what motivated the publication of this case. So the background was that Mary Wakefield, who was a therapist that performed the treatment, she was in one of our Vodotherapist reviews in Auckland last year, and Kobe Blanchfield, our lymphedema trainer, and Neil Pillar, who many of you will know is also involved in our training. Mary just presented this case as, as we do in these therapist updates. Therapists tell us what's happened in their cases. And Kobe and Neil both picked up on this particular one and thought that it would be a good case for publication, just as a way of trying to address this issue of whether or not things should be redirected away from the damaged axilla. A fairly standard treatment for breast cancer. The most notable part of the history for me is the lack of immediate follow-up for any kind of preventative treatment. So she was not part of a prospective surveillance model, which we know now is really the ideal thing to have. And you can see that she had repeated episodes of cellulitis, which also should have triggered an appropriate referral to a lymphedema therapist, in my view. However, she didn't really have any notable swelling for several years later. And then she saw a physio about this because she was a tennis player and it was a problem at the elbow. The swelling had started at the elbow. So the physiotherapist was treating it as if it was an elbow strain. The client wasn't very happy with this. She stopped seeing the physio, went back to her doctor, who then referred her to an outpatient lymphedema clinic, which is where she was treated with compression only and no MLD. And that actually made her hand swell. Her hand hadn't been swollen before that. And she really felt that she was unheard when she tried to address this new development with the therapist. So she finally self-referred herself to the clinic where at Dove Hospice, where Mary was working. And by this time now, she had pitting edema of the forearm with some mild swelling on the back of her hand. And Mary is a VOD-trained therapist, and so therefore did the full CDT, combined decongestive therapy, which includes MLD to direct fluid into adjacent lymph pathways, including the parasternal and contralateral lymph nodes and along the radial pathway towards the clavicle. And Mary did 8 sessions over 14 months and taught the client how to do her own self-massage following the same lymph pathways as Mary was doing with the MLD. So we come to 2020, and by now she has quite a well-managed arm that she's managing herself, but definitely going to be some tissue changes, probably some fatty deposits there as well. And so, you know, not able to get any further improvement. So in 2022, she seeks reduction therapy with liposuction at Macquarie with the Alert team and gets a really great outcome. She really regains her ability to play tennis and be more active. And I really like this quote from her: "I got my old life back, my old enjoyment in physical exercise and travel, my independence and confidence. I could lead an active life without being tied to hospitals and physical treatments." So this is, you know, I'm really happy about the way that lymphedema management is going now. You know, when I was back in the clinic, when Mike was there with us in 2008, you know, all these liposuctions and everything was still very experimental and they weren't really a good option for people. So it's fabulous that they have these options now. But what was interesting about this for us and what prompted the case study was what the ICG imaging showed. And so here I've just my little hand-drawn image here. You can see the blue and green shaded areas are the normal lymph territories of the arm, and the black arrows are where lymph would normally be flowing towards the axilla. Then we have the red shaded areas showing where the ICG imaging showed some dermal backflow, and those red arrows are the direction of movement that was shown with the ICG. This is where the ICG was moving, which you can see is directly opposite to the normal flow. It's in the same direction as Mary and the client would have been doing their MLD for those preceding years when she was managing it with MLD and her own self-treatment. And the report stated that there was a nice open patent lymph vessel coming up to the clavicular lymph nodes. So what we can't know from these images is what was happening before the MLD, because we don't have any pre-imaging before the MLD was performed. But the fact that there were visible patent lymph vessels carrying lymph along those same pathways that were being used during the MLD and the client self-massage is a good indication that Mary was on the right track to use these pathways and teach the client to do them when she initiated the therapies. And, you know, one of the questions that we pose in the case report is what could have been prevented if this therapy had been initiated preventatively before any of the cellulitis and the other treatments that were applied. So that is basically my little addition to what Mike said.